Hi everyone, I hope everyone's having a good day. Welcome back to class. Unfortunately for you guys, this is just going to be another one of those days where I'm going to be teaching you the lesson through a video instead of in person. Like you guys should know, we're still trying to figure out and create a schedule for what's the best way to teach you guys, right? Just be patient. I'm trying my best because at this point in the class period, you should have studied for your quiz and taken your quiz that I gave to you. And now you're at the point where you are going to learn the lesson. So at this time, please go ahead and make sure you have your journals and are ready to take notes. But as always, if you need to go back, the good thing about it being a video is that you can always press pause, write the information, and then continue to watch the video once you're done. Now, that being said, in terms of your notes, I will be checking your notes in order to ensure that you're actually doing what I need you to be doing. So next time I see you guys, be prepared because not only will I check your annotations, I will also be checking that you're writing notes. So consider this your warning. That being said, let's go ahead and get started into the lesson for today. Now, last class we had the really fun game of the Monroe Doctrine. I hope you guys had a lot of fun. If you did not, well, go ahead and let me know. I'm happy to take any type of construction criticism. But today's lesson is going to be going over the age of Jackson, right? Which is going to be this time period after the lesson from last class, right? So this time period is going to be from 1824 to 1848. And if you notice, this is called the Age of Jackson, which is going to be named after Andrew Jackson. And if that name sounds familiar to you guys, it's because, yes, we have talked about him already back when we did the lesson of the War of 1812, in which Andrew Jackson was a key political general and figure and was one of the few people to win any battles in the War of 1812. So this age, this era is really talking about him and focuses him and his role on the United States. So during this time period, we really saw a huge rise in people participating in democracy, and that was at a higher rate than ever before. And one of the main reasons for this is that in the United States, men, they called for universal male suffrage, meaning that giving that rise in equality among white men, giving them the power to vote, right? Obviously, this only applied to white men, so they ignored a lot of the enslaved African Americans, and they also ignored the rights of the free African Americans at this time. But we did end up seeing that the political offices and the ability to vote was extended to those of the lower and middle ranks of society. Because before this, the qualifications to be able to vote was that you had to be a white man and that you had to own land, right? But if you were a part of the lower part of society, right, you didn't have as much money, then you couldn't own land, meaning you couldn't vote, right? But during this time, we saw that change happen where they started to remove those qualifications, increasing the ability and the number of white men being able to vote. Now, another reason why democracy raised, people participated in democracy more than ever before is because the campaigning strategies of those who were politicians were changed and actually became incredibly popular. Anyone who was running for office, like president, they would throw parades, they would throw rallies, they would have these floats and walk among the cities, and they would even go as far as throwing barbecues, right? All for the purpose of trying to influence the public to gain their trust and their popularity, right? Very much like how we see in today, right? This is an election year this year, and we see our presidential candidates are on TV all the time doing rallies, debates, interviews, so on and so forth, right? That process is known as campaigning. And it is also another reason that people started to participate in democracy is that we saw the return of the two-party system in 1832. Now, if you remember, last class we ended off with understanding how the Federalists, how their party had died, and how we were only left with one Democratic Party, or one political party, the Democratic Republicans, right? But in 1832, we saw that idea of a two-party system being returned. But it was not the Federalists that returned. It was actually a political party known as the Whigs, and the other party were the Democrats. But we did not only have two parties, we actually saw the rise of third parties being created, which are going to be the lesser popular, the lesser known political parties, right? They existed, but they just weren't as popular as the top two, right? And so during this time, we saw the rise of third parties like the anti-Masonic parties and the working men parties. But one of the biggest things that ends up influencing the people's participation in democracy is going to be known as the spoils system, right? Which is a practice in giving government jobs to your average working person or to any person in return for their loyalty to your political party, right? And this spoils system is actually going to be adopted and heavily practiced when Andrew Jackson becomes president. Spoiler alert. And so this is naturally going to have a huge effect on the country, especially in their culture. And it's even going to be so influential that it impacts the American art and politics in the country. Now, what you see here on the screen is an incredibly important painting known as the County Election that was made by George Caleb Bingham. And what this painting does is that it is revealing what every American should look like when they support an election and they understand and embrace the democratic ideal through voting, right? So what you see here is you actually see people, men, they're in line to go vote. And if you look closely, you can see that there are people from all types of backgrounds, right? Here you can see that these people, they're wearing these big hats, right? They're wearing overalls, and overall they look like they're wearing farmers clothes, right? And they're going and they're handing their ballot in. But you can also see those from a different class, right? We see those men that have the top hats, their clothes look slightly fancier. You see them over here as well. And right here, these kind of look along like your middle class. And overall, there's people, they're laughing, right? Look at this dude over here. Look, they're laughing. They're generally enjoying themselves. This man's having a drink. They're generally enjoying themselves, right? So this art is really showing that embrace of a true democratic, um, a true democratic country and what it's supposed to look like, especially during the election process. So by the time Andrew Jackson runs for presidency, and he runs for 3 times, he runs for presidency 3 times, he notices that more and more people are now getting the ability to vote. And so, even though he ran for 3 times, we all know that in the United States, a president can only be president for 2 terms. And so, technically, he did win 3 times. However, the first time, he loses on a technicality. And what I mean by that is that in 1824, Andrew Jackson runs against Henry Clay, John Quincy Adams, John C. Calhoun, and William H. Crawford. Now, all 5 of these people, they are part of the Democratic Republicans. And it's important to note that at this time, we see the end of the era of good feelings, which ended off on not good terms, right? It ended with bad feelings, and there was tensions on the rise. And so in this election, Jackson is going to win the popular and electoral votes, but he ends up losing the election, because the vote was split up into 4 ways and lost that way. And so what ends up happening is Andrew Jackson, he loses to John Quincy Adams, right? And if you look at the chart, Andrew Jackson, again, he has the popular vote, right? He has majority of the electoral vote, and he has the popular vote. However, Henry Clay is going to use his influence in the House of Representatives to secure John Quincy Adams enough votes to win this election, right? So Andrew Jackson is going to lose on a technicality. And in return, right, when John Quincy Adams wins the presidency, in return, he's going to appoint Henry Clay to be his Secretary of State. Now, Andrew Jackson and his supporters, remember he won the popular vote. They get really angry at this and they start to call this election a corrupt bargain, meaning that they were so angry and they started to tell everyone that the decision of the voters had been foiled by a secret plan of political maneuvers, right? Basically accusing John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay of being corrupt and trying to do a bunch of stuff behind the scenes to basically trick the country, right? They essentially calling them cheaters. But alas, John Quincy Adams is president and he wins at this time. And as president, he is going to ask Congress for money multiple times. And he does this because he wants to make internal improvements of the country. But he also asks money to help aid in the manufacturing industries, right? But lastly, he's going to ask Congress for federal money to create a national university and an astronomical observatory, right? And if you don't know what an astronomical observatory is, it's essentially a building that is used for the study of stars, right? Now, when you think about it, John Adams is asking the federal government, Congress, to use federal government money for these three things. And Jackson, still really butthurt about losing and still really angry about losing this election, he is going to be a huge criticizer of John Quincy Adams. And he's going to loudly state that this plan is a huge waste of federal money. And he even goes on to say that it is a violation of the Constitution. But Congress, while they don't provide all the money to do all this stuff, they do end up creating a new tariff law during this time, right? And that is going to be known as the Tariff of 1828. Now, what was this tariff? If you remember, a tariff is going to be an increased cost on imported goods. So in 1828, Congress is going to create this tariff in order to help manufacturers compete with foreign goods, right? Making all of those foreign goods and foreign imports, all of the products that are coming in from outside of the United States is going to make all of those more expensive. So naturally, this is going to anger the South. The South is going to hate this tariff. And they even go so far as renaming this tariff, and they call it the Tariff of Abominations. Right? The South, they hated it so much because they believed it was incredibly unfair to them, and it really targeted their region who relied on imports. Because you have to remember that the South, their main form of making money is through their agrarian economy, right? Their cash crops, right? Tobacco and cotton. And all of those products, well, they're not just sold within the United States. They're sold and they're exported to other countries all over the world. Right? And so with this tariff on the imports, well, it's just going to make it that much harder for them to actually do or receive trade from other countries, right? So they thought it was targeted. They thought it was really unfair for them. Now, if you notice that this tariff is in 1828, John Quincy Adams, he wins his presidency in 1824. So this tariff ends up happening at the end of his presidential term. And in 1828, John Quincy Adams decides to run for presidency again. And who's his main opposition? It's going to be none other than Andrew Jackson. Now, if you take a look at this map, John Quincy Adams is going to identify as the National Republican, while Andrew Jackson is going to identify as a Democratic Republican, right? Those are their political parties. And if you take a look and take a moment and look at the map, Andrew Jackson is going to win 178 electoral votes, and he's going to win 56% of the popular vote, right? And if you look simply at the map, all of the supporters of Andrew Jackson are going to be highlighted in yellow, and that is going to take up a huge chunk of the country. Now, you may ask yourself, how did Andrew Jackson and the Democratic Party win this election? Well, what Andrew Jackson does is that he goes above and beyond your normal campaigning, right? Yes, he still goes on parades and he does rallies and rides the floats, but he's going to get his hands dirty during this election, and he's going to make it personal. He's going to smear the name of President Adams, right? And he's going to go and make it super personal with this beef with John Adams, right? And he's going to go as far as getting John Adams' wife involved. He is going to accuse John Adams' wife to be born out of wedlock. Now, if you don't know what that means, to be born out of wedlock is when a child is born outside of someone's marriage, meaning if a man or a woman have a child and they are not married, right? And when you think about this time period, people are super traditional, they're super religious, so this is going to cause huge controversy. And it's obviously going to negatively impact John Quincy Adams, because we all know how rumors work, and we all know that rumors can have a huge negative effect. And so, boom, Andrew Jackson wins the election of 1828. And during his campaign, he is going to gain the nickname as the common man's presidential candidate. And now, Andrew Jackson, again, we remember, he was heavily involved in the War of 1812. He is a war hero, and he is actually going to use that label and that celebration of being a war hero to his advantage. And he gains popularity, especially among those who were among the lower and middle classes, right? Because he presented himself as one of the people, right? He was a common man. And so during Jackson's presidency, this is how he ends up gaining the support of all of these different demographics. Because this is going to be known as Jackson's coalition. And when Andrew Jackson wins the presidency, he is going to dominate politics for the next 8 years, meaning that he wins the next 2 presidential terms and becomes a symbol for the working class. At the same time, he's going to gain the support of people who distrust the wealthy that live in the East. And on top of that, because he is the common man and he is from the South, he is also going to gain the trust of the planter elite in the South, right? The rich people in the South, those who have the largest plantations. On top of that, he's also going to gain the support of people who live on the frontier, meaning all of those who live on the border of the United States, especially those closer to the west. And on top of that, as I mentioned earlier, Andrew Jackson is going to adopt the spoils system, right? So many of his state politicians are going to be those people that pledge their loyalty to him in order to gain those state um, positions, right? And lastly, the last type of group that ends up supporting Andrew Jackson is going to be immigrants in the city. And when you look at this whole list, every single group of people comes from a different background, right? And remember, Andrew Jackson is going to be known as the common man's president, because not only does he gain the support of all these people and he becomes a symbol for the working class, he's also going to be the first president since George Washington not to have a college education. And if you remember, at this time, it was not super often until recently that someone who was not rich, educated, or land owning to be in a position of power. So here you have Andrew Jackson, a common man who does not have a college education, rise to the top position of power, right? He becomes president. And during his presidency, Andrew Jackson is really going to sympathize with people who live on the frontier, those who live on the border. And so one of his most important known acts as president is going to be Indian removal, right? Jackson, he, in his definition, in his concept of democracy, that did not extend to the Native Americans that lived in the United States, right? To him, they were not citizens, therefore, he did not have to care about them. However, those who he did care about are going to be all of those that live on the frontier. So he sympathized very deeply with the land hungry citizens that were incredibly impatient to take over the lands that were held by American Indians. And so, what he does 2 years after being elected president in 1830, he is going to enforce the Indian Removal Act, which is exactly what it sounds like. It is forcibly removing what was known at the time as the five civilized tribes. And one of the most popular, or not popular, well-known tribes that were forced to be removed during this time is going to be the Cherokee Nation. And the Cherokee Nation is going to unfortunately participate in what's known as the Trail of Tears. And just looking at the name alone, we know that this is not a happy thing. This is not a good thing. Now, the Cherokee, they were located right here at the top of Georgia. What they were forced to do, due to this Indian Removal Act, is that Andrew Jackson is going to force the 15,000 Cherokees that live in this area of Georgia to flee from their land, to leave them. And he forces them to leave and move up through Tennessee, all in this red line, to move to what's now modern day Oklahoma. Now, if you don't know, this area, there are the Appalachian Mountains right here. So they have to cross through mountains, go through forests, and go through this incredibly treacherous land that is incredibly dangerous. And from those 15,000 Cherokees that are forced to be removed, about 4,000 of them are going to die in this Trail of Tears. And that's so sad to hear about. So, Andrew Jackson, I want you guys to go ahead and take a second, look at this image, pause the video if you must, but think about this image. How is this cartoon, this political cartoon, portraying the relationship that Andrew Jackson had between Native Americans? And go ahead and look at it. Andrew Jackson, he's the man that's sitting in the chair, and down here, and even in his lap, are going to be all of the Native Americans. Look at it, look at their expressions. If you look at closely at his face, he kind of looks disgusted, right? Even thinking about how big he is in size in comparison to the Native Americans. Obviously portraying the relationship between Andrew Jackson and the Native Americans in a negative way. Now, this is one of the biggest things that Andrew Jackson is going to be known for, but another thing that he deals with during his presidency is going to be what's known as the nullification issue. Now, remember, Andrew Jackson was elected in 1828. In that same year, we saw the Tariff of 1828, the Tariff of Abominations. And so here's how the timeline looks. In 1828, the South, specifically South Carolina, is going to protest what they call the Tariff of Abomination, right? They're really angry and they claim that it was unconstitutional. That same year, Andrew Jackson wins the presidency, and he is going to name John C. Calhoun, which is this lovely looking man right here. He is going to place Calhoun as his vice president. However, Calhoun was a firm believer in what was known as nullification theory, which means that he believed that each state had the right to decide whether to obey a federal law or declare it null and void it, right, remove it. And so because John C. Calhoun believed this, in that same year of 1828, he is going to resign as vice president of Andrew Jackson in support of South Carolina. Now, naturally, Andrew Jackson is going to be very angry about this, but he leaves it alone for a minute. And in that time, in 1832, Congress is going to go ahead and approve a whole new tariff, which means that now they are going to add these extra fees and raise the prices on all of those imported goods. So now the South and South Carolina not only have to deal with the tariff of 1828, but now they have to deal with the 1832. And what do you think their reaction is going to be? Naturally, they're going to get even more angry, right? If they already called the tariff of 1828 the tariff of abominations, this new tariff is going to make them even more mad, right? And so South Carolina, they're going to call for nullification, right? They are going to get so angry that they say, we do not want to follow this law. We need to remove it from our Congress right now, or else. And it is during this time period that tensions are really going to rise. And tensions get so bad that in response to this, Andrew Jackson is going to sign the Force Bill, which is going to give him authorization as president to act against South Carolina if they decided to get violent. Because at this time, seeing all of these tensions rise, Andrew Jackson is going to have a private conversation with his Secretary of State, and he's going to tell him, go ahead and start arming our forces and start preparing for what could potentially be a civil war in the country. Now you might be asking yourself, where does Henry Clay come in? Remember, what was Henry Clay's nickname that he was given? He was known as the Great Compromiser. So Henry Clay is going to come in. There he is in the lovely corner. That's what he looks like. Henry Clay, the Great Compromiser, he's going to come in and save the day again. And he is going to propose the compromise tariff, which is going to balance out those tensions that have risen. Now, the very last thing I want to end off this lesson in before I go and explain your independent practice is I want to show you another political cartoon. And so, seeing where I just ended off, this rise in tensions is going to actually end up costing Andrew Jackson with a lot of the power that he got. And he's going to end up earning the nickname of King Andrew the First. So I want you to take a second, pause the video again, and really analyze this political cartoon and think about what message is it trying to portray. Look at the attention to detail, look at everything. What is he stepping on? What are the words trying to say? How is he dressed, right? Because what's going to end up happening is that he is going to be far away from the idea of the commons man as president to now gain this new nickname of King Andrew the First. And I really want you to think about why. In next class, I will talk to you guys and really sit down and analyze this political cartoon. But now what you guys are going to do after watching this whole video and taking all of your notes, you're going to do your independent practice. And your independent practice is going to be a Venn diagram in which you are going to compare and contrast the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions and the nullification crisis. Now, if you don't remember what the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, those were the responses that Thomas Jefferson and James Madison did in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts that John Adams had created, right? And just to give you a short summary, John Adams created the Alien and Sedition Acts in an attempt to silence the voices and criticisms of the Democratic Republicans that Thomas Jefferson and James Madison belonged to. But of course, if you need more information about the Alien and Sedition Acts, the reading for them can be found in your week 4 folder on Schoology. I believe it's green. And the reading is titled Adams and Revolution of 1800. That is the reading, and obviously the one right after that is going to have Jefferson and Madison's responses. Now this independent practice, this Venn diagram, is going to be due next time I see you in class, which is going to be on Tuesday, and I will have you in class on Tuesday. So on your Venn diagram, you need to have 3 to 4 bullet points explaining specific details of the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, comparing it and contrasting it with the nullification crisis, right? So it should be a total or a minimum of 9 points total. So it should be 9 to 12 points total. And of course, if at any point you have any questions, don't feel free to reach out to me. I will be always around. I'll also be stepping in and out of class as well today. That being said, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Enjoy your week. Enjoy Skyhawk-Palooza. Enjoy your weekend. And I will for sure see you guys on Tuesday. So make sure you have your notes and your annotations. Bye.